A man of business. The word lorette is a euphemism invented to describe the status of a personage, or a personage of a status, of which it is awkward to speak. The French Academy, in its modesty, having omitted to supply a definition out of regard for the age of its 40 members. Whenever a new word comes to supply the place of an unwieldy circumlocution, its fortune is assured. The word lorette has passed into the language of every class of society. Even where the lorette herself will never gain an entrance, it was only invented in 1840 and derived beyond a doubt from the agglomeration of such swallows' nests about the Church of Our Lady of Loretto. This information is for etymologists only. Those gentlemen would not be so often in a quandary if medieval writers had only taken such pains with details of contemporary manners as we take in these days of analysis and description. Emile Turquet, or Malaga, for she is better known by her pseudonym C. La Fausse Maîtresse, was one of the earliest parishioners of that charming church, at the time to which this story belongs. That light-hearted and lively damsel gladdened the existence of a notary, with a wife somewhat too bigoted, rigid, and frigid for domestic happiness. Now it so fell out that one carnival evening Maître Cardat was entertaining guests at Emile Turquet's house. Desroches, the attorney Bixiou of the caricatures, Lousteau, the journalist Nathan, and others. It is quite unnecessary to give any further description of these personages, all bearers of illustrious names in the Comédie Humaine. Young La Palferine, in spite of his title of Count, and his great descent, which alas means a great descent in fortune likewise, had honored the notary's little establishment with his presence. At dinner in such a house one does not expect to meet the patriarchal beef, the skinny fowl, and salad of domestic and family life, nor is there any attempt at the hypocritical conversation of drawing-rooms furnished with highly respectable matrons, when alas, will respectability be charming, when will the women in good society vouchsafe to show rather less of their shoulders, and rather more wit or geniality? Marguerite Turquet, the Aspasia of the Cirque Olympique, is one of those frank, very living personalities to whom all is forgiven. Such unconscious sinners, are they such intelligent penitents? Of such as Malaga, one might ask, like Cardot, a witty man, enough albeit a notarito, be well deceived. And yet you must not think that any enormities were committed. Desroches and Cardat were good fellows grown too grey in the profession not to feel at ease with Bixiou, Lousteau, Nathan, and young La Palferine, and they on their side had too often had recourse to their legal advisers, and knew them too well to try to draw them out in lorette language. Conversation perfumed with 7 cigars at first was as fantastic as a kid let loose, but finally it settled down upon the strategy of the constant war waged in Paris between creditors and debtors. Now if you will be so good as to recall the history and antecedents of the guests, you will know that in all Paris you could scarcely find a group of men with more experience in this matter. The professional men on one hand and the artists on the other were something in the position of magistrates and criminals hobnobbing together. A set of Bictious drawings to illustrate life in the debtors' prison led the conversation to take this particular turn, and from debtors' prisons they went to debts. It was midnight. They had broken up into little knots round the table and before the fire, and gave themselves up to the burlesque fun which is only possible or comprehensible in Paris, and in that particular region which is bounded by the Faubourg Montmartre, the Rue Chaussée d'Antin, the upper end of the Rue de Navarone, and the line of the boulevards. In 10 minutes' time, they had come to an end of all the deep reflections, all the moralizing small and great, all the bad puns made on a subject already exhausted by Rabelais 350 years ago. It was not a little to their credit that the pyrotechnic display was cut short with a final squib from Malaga. "It all goes to the shoemakers. She said I left a milliner because she failed twice with my hats. The vixen has been here 27 times to ask for 20 francs. She did not know that we never have 20 francs. One has 1,000 francs, or one sends to one's notary for 500, but 20 francs I have never had in my life. My cook and my maid may perhaps have so much between them, but for my own part I have nothing but credit, and I should lose that if I took to borrowing small sums. If I were to ask for 20 francs, I should have nothing to distinguish me from my colleagues. that walk the boulevard. "Is the milliner paid?" asked La Palferine. "Oh, come now, are you turning stupid?" said she. "With a wink she came this morning, for the 27th time, that is, how I came to mention it." "What did you do?" asked Desroches. "I took pity upon her and ordered a little hat, that I have just invented a quite new shape. If Amanda succeeds with it, she will say no more about the money her fortune is made." "In my opinion," put in Desroches, "the finest things that I have seen in a duel of this kind give those who know Paris a far better picture of the city than all the fancy portraits that they paint. Some of you think that you know a thing or two," he continued, glancing round at Nathan, Bixiou, La Palferine, and Lousteau. "But the king of the ground is a certain count now busy ranging himself. In his time he was supposed to be the cleverest, adroitest, canniest, boldest, stoutest, most subtle, and experienced of all the pirates who, equipped with fine manners, yellow kid gloves, and cabs, have ever sailed or ever will sail upon the stormy seas of Paris. He fears neither God nor man. He applies in private life the principles that guide the English cabinet up to the time of his marriage. His life was one continual war, like Lousteau's, for instance. I was, and am still, his solicitor." "And the first letter of his name is Maxime de Trailles," said La Palferine. "For that matter, he has paid every one and injured no one," continued Desroches. "But as your friend Bixiou was saying just now, it is a violation of the liberty of the subject to be made to pay in March, when you have no mind to pay till October, by virtue of this article of his particular code." Maxime regarded a creditor's scheme for making him pay at once as a swindler's trick. It was a long time since he had grasped the significance of the bill of exchange in all its bearings, direct and remote. "A young man once in my place called a bill of exchange the ass's bridge in his hearing. No," said he, "it is the bridge of sighs. It is the shortest way to an execution." Indeed, his knowledge of commercial law was so complete that a professional could not have taught him anything at that time. He had nothing, as you know. His carriage and horses were jobbed. He lived in his valet's house, and by the way, he will be a hero to his valet to the end of the chapter, even after the marriage that he proposes to make. He belonged to 3 clubs, and dined at one of them. Whenever he did not dine out, as a rule, he was to be found very seldom at his own address. "He once said to me," interrupted La Palferine, "my one affectation is the pretense that I make of living in the Rue Pigalle." "Well," resumed Desroches, "he was one of the combatants, and now for the other. You have heard more or less talk of one Clapeyron." "Had hair like this," cried Bixiou, ruffling his locks till they stood on end, "gifted with the same talent for mimicking absurdities which Chopin the pianist possesses to so high a degree. He proceeded forthwith to represent the character with startling truth. He rolls his head like this when he speaks. He was once a commercial traveler. He has been all sorts of things. Well, he was born to travel, for at this minute, as I speak, he is on the sea on his way to America," said Desroches. "It is his only chance, for in all probability he will be condemned by default as a fraudulent bankrupt next session." "Very much at sea," exclaimed Malaga. "For 6 or 7 years, this Clapeyron acted as man of straw, cat's paw, and scapegoat to 2 friends of ours, Du Tillet and Nucingen. But in 1829, his part was so well known that our friends dropped him, put in Bixiou. They left him to his fate at last, and he wallowed in the mire," continued Desroches. "In 1833, he went into partnership with one Cerizet. What he that promoted a joint stock company so nicely that the 6th chamber cut short his career with a couple of years in jail?" asked the Lorette. "The same under the Restoration. Between 1823 and 1827, Cerizet's occupation consisted in first putting his name intrepidly to various paragraphs, on which the public prosecutor fastened with avidity, and subsequently marching off to prison. A man could make a name for himself with small expense in those days. The Liberal party called their provincial champion the courageous Cerizet, and towards 1828, so much zeal received its reward in general interest. General interest is a kind of civic crown bestowed on the deserving by the daily press. Cerizet tried to discount the general interest taken in him. He came to Paris, and with some help from capitalists in the opposition, started as a broker, and conducted financial operations to some extent the capital being found by a man in hiding a skillful gambler who overreached himself, and in consequence in July 1830 his capital foundered in the shipwreck of the government. "Oh, it was he, whom we used to call the system," cried Bixiou. "Say no harm of him, poor fellow," protested Malaga d'Estrony, "was a good sort." You can imagine the part that a ruined man was sure to play in 1830 when his name in politics was the courageous Cerizet. He was sent off into a very snug little sub-prefecture. Unluckily for him, it is one thing to be in opposition, and a missile is good enough to throw so long as the flight lasts, but quite another to be in office 3 months later. He was obliged to send in his resignation, had he not taken it into his head to attempt to win popularity still, as he had done nothing as yet to imperil his title of courageous. Cerizet, the government proposed by way of compensation that he should manage a newspaper, nominally an opposition newspaper, but ministerialist in petto. So the fall of this noble nature was really due to the government. To Cerizet, as manager of the paper, it was rather too evident that he was as a bird perched on a rotten bough, and then it was that he promoted that nice little joint stock company and thereby secured a couple of years in prison. He was caught, while more ingenious swindlers succeeded in catching the public. "We are acquainted with the more ingenious," said Bixiou. "Let us say no ill of the poor fellow. He was nabbed couture, allowed them to squeeze his cash box. Who would ever have thought it of him?" At all events, Cerizet was a low sort of fellow, a good deal damaged by low debauchery. Now for the duel I spoke about. Never did two tradesmen of the worst type, with the worst manners, the lowest pair of villains imaginable, go into partnership in a dirtier business. Their stock in trade consisted of the peculiar idiom of the man about town, the audacity of poverty, the cunning that comes of experience, and a special knowledge of Parisian capitalists, their origin, connections, acquaintances, and intrinsic value. This partnership of two dabblers, let the stock exchange term pass for it, is the only word which describes them. This partnership of dabblers did not last very long. They fought like famished curs over every bit of garbage. The earlier speculations of the firm of Cerizet and Claparon were however well planned. The two scamps joined forces with Barbet, Chabiso, Salmonin, and usurers of that stamp, and bought up hopelessly bad debts. Claparon's place of business at that time was a cramped entresol in the Rue Chabannes, rooms at a rent of 700 francs at most. Each partner slept in a little closet, so carefully closed from prudence that my head clerk could never get inside the furniture of the other 3 rooms. An antechamber, a waiting room, and a private office would not have fetched 300 francs altogether at a distress warrant sale. You know enough of Paris to know the look of it: the stuffed horsehair covered chairs, a table covered with a green cloth, a trumpery clock between a couple of candle sconces, growing tarnished under glass shades, the small gilt-framed mirror over the chimney-piece, and in the grate a charred stick or 2 of firewood, which had lasted them for 2 winters. As my head clerk put it, as for the office, you can guess what it was like: more letter files than business letters, a set of common pigeonholes for either partner, a cylinder desk empty as the cash box in the middle of the room, and a couple of armchairs on either side of a coal fire. The carpet on the floor was bought cheap at second hand, like the bills and bad debts. In short, it was the mahogany furniture of furnished apartments, which usually descends from one occupant of chambers to another during 50 years of service. Now you know the pair of antagonists. During the first 3 months of a partnership, dissolved 4 months later in a bout of fisticuffs, Cerizet and Claparon bought up 2,000 francs worth of bills bearing Maxim's signature, since Maxime was his name, and filled a couple of letters to bursting with judgments, appeals, orders of the court, distress warrants, application for stay of proceedings, and all the rest of it. To put it briefly, they had bills for 3,200 francs odd centimes, for which they had given 500 francs, the transfer being made under private seal, with special power of attorney, to save the expense of registration. Now, it so happened, at this juncture, Maxime, being of ripe age, was seized with one of the fancies peculiar to the man of 50. "Antonia," exclaimed La Palferine, "that Antonia whose fortune I made by writing to ask for a toothbrush." "Her real name is Chacardel," said Malaga, not over well pleased. by the fine-sounding pseudonym. The same continued Desraches. It was the only mistake Maxime ever made in his life, but what would you have no vice is absolutely perfect put in Bixiou. Maxime had still to learn what sort of a life a man may be led into by a girl of 18 when she is minded to take a header from her honest garret into a sumptuous carriage. It is a lesson that all statesmen should take to heart at this time. De Marsay had just been employing his friend, our friend de Trailles, in the high comedy of politics. Maxime had looked high for his conquests. He had no experience of untitled women, and at 50 years he felt that he had a right to take a bite of the so-called wild fruit much as a sportsman will halt under a peasant's apple tree. So the Count found a reading groom for Emile Chacardel, a rather smart little place, to be had cheap as usual. Pooh, said Nathan, she did not stay in it 6 months. She was too handsome to keep a reading groom. Perhaps you are the father of her child, suggested the Lorette. Desraches resumed. Since the firm bought up Maxime's debt, Cerizet's likeness to a bailiff's officer grew more and more striking, and one morning, after 7 fruitless attempts, he succeeded in penetrating into the Count's presence. Suzanne, the old manservant, albeit he was by no means in his novitiate at last, mistook the visitor for a petitioner come to propose 1,000 crowns if Maxime would obtain a license to sell postage stamps for a young lady. Suzanne, without the slightest suspicion of the little scamp, a thoroughbred Paris street, into whom prudence had been rubbed by repeated personal experience of the police courts, induced his master to receive him. Can you see the man of business, with an uneasy eye, a bald forehead, and scarcely any hair on his head, standing in his threadbare jacket and muddy boots? What a picture of a dun, cried Louster. Standing before the Count, that image of flaunting debt, in his blue flannel dressing-gown, slippers worked by some marquise, or other trousers of white woolen stuff, and a dazzling shirt there, he stood with a gorgeous cap on his black dyed hair, playing with the tassels at his waist. 'Tis a bit of genre for anybody who knows what the pretty little morning room hung with silk, and full of valuable paintings, where Maxime breakfasts, said Nathan. You tread on a Smyrna carpet. You admire the sideboards filled with curiosities and rarities fit to make a king of Saxony envious. Now for the scene itself, said Desraches, and the deepest silence followed. Monsieur le Comte, began Cerizet, I have come from a Roman 1000 Charles Clapeyron, who used to be a banker. Ah, poor devil, and what does he want with me? Well, he is at present your creditor, for a matter of 3,200 francs 75 centimes, principal, interest, and costs. Cautelier's business, put in Maxime, who knew his affairs, as a pilot knows his coast. Yes, Monsieur le Comte, said Cerizet, with a bow, I have come to ask your intentions. I shall only pay when the fancy takes me, returned Maxime, and he rang for Suzanne. It was very rash of Clapeyron to buy up bills of mine, without speaking to me beforehand. I am sorry for him, for he did so very well for such a long time, as a man of straw for friends of mine. I always said that a man must really be weak in his intellect to work for men that stuff themselves with millions, and to serve them so faithfully for such low wages. And now here he gives me another proof of his stupidity. Yes, men deserve what they get. It is your own doing, whether you get a crown on your forehead or a bullet through your head, whether you are a millionaire or a porter. Justice is always done you. I cannot help it, my fellow. I myself am not a king. I stick to my principles. I have no pity for those that put me to expense, or do not know their business as creditors. Suzanne, my tea. Do you see this gentleman? He continued, when the man came in. Well, you have allowed yourself to be taken in, poor old boy. This gentleman is a creditor. You ought to have known him by his boots. No friend nor foe of mine, nor those that are neither, and want something of me, come to see me on foot, my dear Roman 1000 Cerizet. Do you understand? You will not wipe your boots on my carpet again. Looking, as he spoke, at the mud that whitened the enemy's souls, convey my compliments and sympathy to Clapeyron, poor buffer, for I shall file this business under the letter Z. All this with an easy good humor fit to give a virtuous citizen the colic. You are wrong, Monsieur le Comte, retorted Cerizet in a slightly peremptory tone. We will be paid in full, and that in a way which you may not like. That is why I came to you first, in a friendly spirit, as is right and fit between gentlemen. Oh, so that is how you understand it, began Maxime, enraged by this last piece of presumption. There was something of Talleyrand's wit in the insolent retort. If you have quite grasped the contrast between the two men and their costumes, Maxime scowled and looked full at the intruder. Cerizet not merely endured the glare of cold fury, but even returned it with an icy cat-like malignance and fixity of gaze. Very good, sir, go out. Very well, good day, Monsieur le Comte. We shall be quits before 6 months are out. If you can steal the amount of your bill which is legally due, I own I shall be indebted to you, sir, replied Maxime. You will have taught me a new precaution to take. I am very much your servant. Monsieur le Comte, said Cerizet, it is I, on the contrary, who am yours. Here was an explicit, forcible, confident declaration on either side, a couple of tigers confabulating with the prey before them, and a fight impending would have been no finer and no shrewder than this pair, the insolent fine gentleman, as great a blackguard as the other in his soiled and mud-stained clothes. Which will you lay your money on? Asked Desroches, looking round at an audience, surprised to find how deeply it was interested. A pretty story, cried Malaga. My dear boy, go on, I beg of you. This goes to one's heart. Nothing commonplace could happen between two fighting cocks of that caliber, added La Palferine. Pooh, cried Malaga, I will wager my cabinet makers, invoice the fellow is dunning me, that the little toad was too many for Maxime. I bet on Maxime, said Cardot, nobody ever caught him napping. Desroches drank off a glass that Malaga handed to him. Emile Chacardel's reading room, he continued, after a pause, was in the Rue Coquenard, just a step or two from the Rue Pigalle, where Maxime was living. The said Emile Chacardel lived at the back on the garden side of the house, beyond a big dark place, where the books were kept. Antonia left her aunt to look after the business. Had she an aunt, even then, exclaimed Malaga, hang it all, Maxime did things handsomely. Alas, it was a real aunt, said Desroches, her name was, let me see. Ida Bonamy, said Bixiou. So as Antonia's aunt took a good deal of the work off her hands, she went to bed late, and lay late of a morning, never showing her face at the desk, until the afternoon, sometime between 2 and 4, from the very first her appearance was enough to draw custom. Several elderly men in the quarter used to come, among them a retired coach-builder, one Croise. Beholding this miracle of female loveliness through the window panes, he took it into his head to read the newspapers in the beauty's reading room, and a sometime custom-house officer named Denisart, with a ribbon in his buttonhole, followed the example Croiseau chose to look upon Denisart as a rival. Monsieur, he said afterwards, I did not know what to buy for you. That speech should give you an idea of the man. The Sieur Croise happens to belong to a particular class of old man, which should be known as cockerels, since Henry Monier's time so well did Monier render the piping voice, the little mannerisms, little cue, little sprinkling of powder, little movements of the head, prim little manner, and tripping gait in the part of cockerel in La Famille Improvisi. This Croise used to hand over his halfpence with a flourish, and a their fair lady. Mme. Ida Bonamy, the aunt, was not long in finding out through a servant that Croise, by popular report of the neighborhood of the Rue de Buffalt, where he lived, was a man of exceeding stinginess, possessed of 40,000 francs per annum a week. After the installment of the charming librarian, he was delivered of a pun. You lend me books, livers, but I give you plenty of francs in return, said he. A few days later, he put on a knowing little air, as much as to say, I know you are engaged, but my turn will come one day. I am a widower. He always came arrayed in fine linen, a cornflower blue coat, a paduasoy waistcoat, black trousers, and black ribbon bows on the double-soled shoes that creaked like an abs. He always held a 14-franc silk hat in his hand. I am old, and I have no children, he took occasion to confide to the young lady some few days after Cerizet's visit to Maxime. I hold my relations in horror. They are peasants born to work in the fields. Just imagine it. I came up from the country with 6 francs in my pocket, and made my fortune here. I am not proud. A pretty woman is my equal now. Would it not be nicer to be Mme. Croise for some years to come than to do a count's pleasure for a 12-month? He will go off and leave you some time or other, and when that day comes, you will think of me your servant, my pretty lady. All this was simmering below the surface. The slightest approach at lovemaking was made quite on the sly. Not a soul suspected that the trim little old fogey was smitten with Antonia, and so prudent was the elderly lover that no rival could have guessed anything from his behavior in the reading-room. For a couple of months Croix watched the retired custom-house official, but before the third month was out, he had good reason to believe that his suspicions were groundless. He exerted his ingenuity to scrape an acquaintance with Denisart, came up with him in the street, and at length seized his opportunity to remark, "It is a fine day, sir." Whereupon the retired official responded with Austerlitz, "Whether, sir, I was there myself, I was wounded. Indeed, I won my cross on that glorious day." And so from one thing to another the two drifted wrecks of the empire struck up an acquaintance. Little Croix was attached to the empire through his connection with Napoleon's sisters. He had been their coach-builder, and had frequently done them for money, so he gave out that he had had relations with the imperial family. Maxime, duly informed by Antonia of the nice old man's proposals, for so the aunt called Croix, wished to see him. Cereset's declaration of war had so far taken effect that he of the yellow kid gloves was studying the position of every piece, however insignificant, upon the board, and it so happened that at the mention of that nice old man, an ominous tinkling sounded in his ears one evening. Therefore Maxime seated himself among the bookshelves in the dimly lighted back room, reconnoitered the 7 or 8 customers through the chink between the green curtains, and took the little coach-builder's measure. He gauged the man's infatuation, and was very well satisfied to find that the varnished doors of a tolerably sumptuous future were ready to turn at a word from Antonia, so soon as his own fancy had passed off. "And that other one yonder?" asked he, pointing out the stout, fine-looking elderly man with the cross of the Legion of Honor. "Who is he?" "A retired custom-house officer. The cut of his countenance is not reassuring," said Maxime, beholding the Sieur Denisart. And indeed the old soldier held himself upright as a steeple. His head was remarkable for the amount of powder and pomatum bestowed upon it. He looked almost like a postilion at a fancy ball. Underneath that felted covering molded to the top of the wearer's cranium appeared an elderly profile, half official, half soldierly, with a comical admixture of arroganceto. There's something like caricatures of the constitutional, the sometime official, finding that age and hair powder and the conformation of his spine made it impossible to read a word. Without spectacles, sat displaying a very creditable expanse of chest, with all the pride of an old man, with a mistress like old General Montcornet. That pillar of the vaudeville. He wore earrings. Denisart was partial to blue. His roomy trousers and well-worn greatcoat were both of blue cloth. "How long is it since that old fogey came here?" inquired Maxime, thinking that he saw danger in the spectacles. "Oh, from the beginning," returned Antonia, "pretty nearly 2 months ago now." "Good," said Maxime to himself. "Cereset only came to me a month ago. Just get him to talk," he added in Antonia's ear. "I want to hear his voice." "Pshaw," said she, "that is not so easy. He never says a word to me." "Then why does he come here?" demanded Maxime. "For a queer reason," returned the fair Antonia. "In the first place, although he is 69, he has a fancy, and because he is 69, he is as methodical as a clock face. Every day at 5 o'clock, the old gentleman goes to dine with her in the Rue de la Victoire. I am sorry for her. Then at 6 o'clock, he comes here, reads steadily at the papers for 4 hours, and goes back at 10 o'clock. Daddy Croiseau says that he knows Roman 1000 Denisart's motives and approves his conduct, and in his place, he would do the same. So I know exactly what to expect. If ever I am Mme Croix, I shall have 4 hours to myself between 6 and 10 o'clock. Maxime looked through the directory and found the following reassuring item: Denisart, retired custom house officer, Rue de la Victoire. His uneasiness vanished. Gradually the Sieur Denisart and the Sieur Croiseau began to exchange confidences. Nothing so binds 2 men together as a similarity of views in the matter of womankind. Daddy Croiseau went to dine with Roman 1000 Denisart's fair lady, as he called her, and here I must make a somewhat important observation. The reading groom had been paid for half in cash, half in bills signed by the said M. Chacardel. The court juror de Rabelais arrived. The count had no money, so the first bill of 3,000 francs was met by the amiable coach-builder, that old scoundrel Denisart, having recommended him to secure himself with a mortgage on the reading groom. For my own part, said Denisart, I have seen pretty doings from pretty women, so in all cases, even when I have lost my head, I am always on my guard with a woman. There is this creature, for instance. I am madly in love with her. But this is not her furniture, no, it belongs to me. The lease is taken out in my name. You know, Maxime, he thought the coach-builder, uncommonly green Croix, might pay all 3 bills, and get nothing for a long while, for Maxime felt more infatuated with Antonia than ever. I can well believe it, said La Palferine. She is the Bella Imperia of our day. With her rough skin, exclaimed Malaga, so rough that she ruins herself in bran baths. Croiseau spoke with a coach-builder's admiration of the sumptuous furniture provided by the amorous Denisart as a setting for his fair one, describing it all in detail with diabolical complacency for Antonia's benefit. Continued Desroches, the ebony chests inlaid with mother-of-pearl and gold wire, the Brussels carpets, a medieval bedstead worth 3,000 francs, a boule clock candelabra in the 4 corners of the dining room, silk curtains on which Chinese patience had wrought pictures of birds, and hangings over the doors worth more than the portress that opened them. And that is what you ought to have, my pretty lady, and that is what I should like to offer you, he would conclude. I am quite aware that you scarcely care a bit about me, but at my age we cannot expect too much. Judge how much I love you. I have lent you 1,000 francs. I must confess that in all my born days I have not lent anybody that much. He held out his penny as he spoke with the important air of a man that gives a learned demonstration. That evening at the Variates, Antonia spoke to the Count. A reading groom is very dull all the same, said she. I feel that I have no sort of taste for that kind of life, and I see no future in it. It is only fit for a widow that wishes to keep body and soul together, or for some hideously ugly thing that fancies she can catch a husband with a little finery. It was your own choice, returned the Count. Just at that moment, in came Nucingen, of whom Maxime, king of lions, the yellow kid gloves, were the lions of that day, had won 3,000 francs the evening before. Nucingen had come to pay his gaming debt. Ein writ of attachment, half schust peen, served on me by der order of dot Teufel Glaberen, he said, seeing Maxime's astonishment. Oh, so that is how they are going to work, is it? Cried Maxime. They are not up to much, that pair. It makes not, said the banker, bei dem, for they may apply themselves to odors pesides undo you harm. I dake dees, Bredy Vaman, to witness dot I half bade you dees, morning, long peffer dat writ vast surft. Queen of the boards, smiled La Palferine, looking at Malaga, thou art about to lose thy bet. Once a long time ago, in a similar case, resumed Desroches, a too honest debtor took fright at the idea of a solemn declaration in a court of law, and declined to pay Maxime after notice was given. That time we made it hot for the creditor by piling on writs of attachment, so as to absorb the whole amount in costs. Oh, what is that? Cried Malaga. It all sounds like gibberish to me. As you thought the sturgeon so excellent at dinner, let me take out the value of the sauce in lessons in chicanery. Very well, said Desroches. Suppose that a man owes you money, and your creditors serve a writ of attachment upon him. There is nothing to prevent all your other creditors from doing the same thing. And now what does the court do? When all the creditors make application for orders to pay, the court divides the whole sum attached proportionately among them. All that division, made under the eye of a magistrate, is what we call a contribution. If you owe 10,000 francs, and your creditors issue writs of attachment on a debt due to you of 1,000 francs, each one of them gets so much per cent, so much in the pound, in legal phrase, so much, that means proportion to the amounts severally claimed by the creditors, but the creditors cannot touch the money without a special order from the clerk of the court. Do you guess what all this work, drawn up by a judge and prepared by attorneys, must mean? It means a quantity of stamped paper full of diffuse lines and blanks the figures almost. Lost in vast spaces of completely empty ruled columns, the first proceeding is to deduct the costs now, as the costs are precisely the same whether the amount attached is 1,000 or 1,000,000 francs. It is not difficult to eat up 3,000 francs, for instance, in costs, especially if you can manage to raise counter-applications. And an attorney always manages to do it, said Cardot. How many a time one of you has come to me with what is there to be got out of the case. It is particularly easy to manage it if the debtor eggs you on to run up costs till they eat up the amount, and as a rule the Count's creditors took nothing by that move, and were out of pocket in law and personal expenses to get money out of so experienced a debtor, as the Count a creditor should really be in a position uncommonly difficult to reach. It is a question of being creditor and debtor both, for then you are legally entitled to work the confusion of rights in law language. To the confusion of the debtor, asked Malaga, lending an attentive ear to this discourse. Know the confusion of rights of debtor and creditor, and pay yourself through your own hands, so Claparon's innocence, in merely issuing writs of attachment, eased the Count's mind. As he came back from the Variates with Antonia, he was so much the more taken with the idea of selling the reading-groom to pay off the last 2,000 francs of the purchase money, because he did not care to have his name made public as a partner in such a concern. So he adopted Antonia's plan. Antonia wished to reach the higher ranks of her calling, with splendid rooms, a maid, and a carriage. In short, she wanted to rival our charming hostess, for instance. She was not woman enough for that, cried the famous beauty of the circus. Still, she ruined young d'Esgrignon very neatly. 10 days afterwards, little Croix, perched on his dignity, said almost exactly the same thing for the fair Antonia's benefit, continued Desroches. Child, said he, your reading-groom is a hole of a place. You will lose your complexion, the gas will ruin your eyesight, you ought to come out of it. And look here, let us take advantage of an opportunity. I have found a young lady for you that asks no better than to buy your reading-groom. She is a ruined woman with nothing before her but a plunge into the river. But she had 4,000 francs in cash, and the best thing to do is to turn them to account so as to feed and educate a couple of children. Very well, it is kind of you, Daddy Croix, said Antonia. Oh, I shall be much kinder before I have done. Just imagine it, poor Roman, 1,000 deniers, has been worried into the jaundice. Yes, it has gone to the liver, as it usually does with susceptible old men. It is a pity he feels things, so I told him so myself. I said, be passionate. There is no harm in that. But as for taking things to heart, draw the line at that. It is the way to kill yourself, really. I would not have expected him to take on so about it, a man that has sense enough and experience enough to keep away as he does while he digests his dinner. But what is the matter? Inquired Emile Chacardel. That little baggage with whom I dined has cleared out and left him. Yes, gave him the slip without any warning, but a letter in which the spelling was all to seek. There, Daddy Croix, you see what comes of boring a woman. It is indeed a lesson, my pretty lady, said the guileful Croix. Meanwhile, I have never seen a man in such a state. Our friend Denisart cannot tell his left hand from his right. He will not go back to look at the scene of his happiness, as he calls it. He has so thoroughly lost his wits that he proposes that I should buy all Hortense's furniture. Hortense was her name, for 4,000 francs. A pretty name, said Antonia. Yes, Napoleon's stepdaughter was called Hortense. I built carriages for her, as you know. Very well, I will see, said cunning Antonia. Begin by sending this young woman to me. Antonia hurried off to see the furniture and came back fascinated. She brought Maxime under the spell of antiquarian enthusiasm. That very evening, the Count agreed to the sale of the reading-groom. The establishment, you see, nominally belonged to Emile Chacardel. Maxime burst out laughing at the idea of little Croix's finding him a buyer. The firm of Maxime and Chacardel was losing 2,000 francs, it is true, but what was the loss compared with 4 glorious 1,000-franc notes in hand? 4,000 francs of live coin. There are moments in one's life when one would sign bills for 8,000 to get them, as the Count said to me. 2 days later, the Count must see the furniture himself and took the 4,000 francs upon him. The sale had been arranged. thanks to little Croiseau's diligence. He pushed matters on. He had come round the widow. As he expressed it, it was Maxim's intention to have all the furniture removed at once to a lodging in a new house in the Rue Tronchet, taken in the name of Mme Ida Bonamy. He did not trouble himself much about the nice old man that was about to lose his 1,000 francs, but he had sent beforehand for several big furniture vans. Once again he was fascinated by the beautiful furniture, which a wholesale dealer would have valued at 6,000 francs. By the fireside sat the wretched owner, yellow, with jaundice, his head tied up in a couple of printed handkerchiefs, and a cotton nightcap on top of them. He was huddled up in wrappings, like a chandelier, exhausted, unable to speak, and altogether so knocked to pieces that the Count was obliged to transact his business with the manservant when he had paid down the 4,000 francs, and the servant had taken the money to his master for a receipt. Maxime turned to tell the man to call up the vans to the door, but even as he spoke a voice, like a rattle, sounded in his ears. "It is not worth while, Monsieur le Comte, you and I are quits. I have 630 francs 15 centimes to give you." To his utter consternation, he saw Cerizet emerged from his wrappings like a butterfly from the chrysalis, holding out the accursed bundle of documents. "When I was down on my luck, I learned to act on the stage," added Cerizet. "I am as good as bouffe at old men." "I have fallen among thieves," shouted Maxime. "No, Monsieur le Comte, you are in Emile Hortense's house. She is a friend of old Lord Dudley's. He keeps her hidden away here, but she has the bad taste to like your humble servant. If ever I longed to kill a man, so the Count told me afterwards, it was at that moment. But what could one do? Hortense showed her pretty face. One had to laugh to keep my dignity. I flung her the 600 francs. Theirs for the girl," said Roman 1. "That is Maxime all over," cried La Palferine. "More especially as it was little Croiseau's money," added Cardot the profound. "Maxime scored a triumph," continued Desroches, for Hortense exclaimed, "Oh, if I had only known that it was you." "A pretty confusion, indeed," put in Malaga. "You have lost, my lord," she added, turning to the notary. And in this way, the cabinet-maker, to whom Malaga owed 100 crowns, was paid. Paris, 1845.